Chloé Zhao's 2021 film Eternals is about many things, but at its heart, it's about the struggle between order and chaos, control and free will, continuity and evolution. And this ideological conflict is symbolically set in motion at the film's very opening, in the precise moment when Richard Madden's character Ikaris shreds some lizard dude with his laser vision. Wait, let's rewind a little. There's two things I like to do on this channel. Well, actually there's way more than two, there's a whole bunch, but two of those things which I do every now and then are: one, hyper-focusing in on one small moment, relentlessly analysing what it could mean, and two, discussing the ways in which modern media properties play with literary tropes and ideas from ancient times. In this video then, I'll be uniting these two proclivities of mine in order to argue that in the opening minutes of Eternals, the film sets up perhaps its major thematic conflict, and it does so in a way that very few of you will have noticed. First things first, let's take a look at what's happening in this scene, on its surface layer. Just after we meet the Eternals on the Domo, after they see Earth for the first time, we cut to a shoreline in Mesopotamia, in 5000 BC, where some humans are having a nice beach day. This beach day is ruined, however, by the surprise emergence of a deviant from the ocean, who snacks on the dad and begins to close in on the son. This deviant is stopped, though, by the sudden appearance of Ikaris the Eternal, who blasts the deviant, damaging the creature to the point that the kid is able to be rescued. This sequence then leads into a bit of a punch-up between some more deviants and some more Eternals, yada yada yada, and the Eternals are introduced to humanity. Now, this opening sequence has a few obvious functions. It gives us a quick introduction to the Eternals, who will be our main characters for the remainder of the film, as well as the Deviants, who will become major antagonists. And it's a fun little action set piece too, getting the viewer's brains to release the awesome chemicals. But I want to dig into the start of this sequence in particular, the moment where Ikaris defeats the dragon-shaped deviant, because it's dripping with mythological significance. I want to argue that this episode is a contemporary riff on a specific ancient trope, commonly known as the Chaoskampf motif. Chaos meaning, well, chaos, and Kampf being the German word for struggle. So what is the Chaoskampf? Many of you will be familiar with the Bible's creation story, in which, TLDR I guess, God separates the primordial waters in order to create the heavens and the earth. As archaeologists and researchers in the 19th and 20th centuries began to piece together cultural impressions of various civilizations from ancient Mesopotamia, i.e. roughly the area of the modern Middle East, they began to notice that some stories from other cultures in the area were oddly similar to those found in the Bible. The most famous example is probably the Babylonian flood myth, which is very, very similar to that Noah story you might have heard of. 40 days and 40 nights and all that. These similarities, to skip over the boring scholarly details, are so numerous and so significant that coincidence is ruled out. We can say fairly objectively that stories like the biblical flood myth, the Babylonian flood myth, and various others are interlinked, that one influenced the composition of the others, or that all are reflections of some older lost texts. Now, a religious person might say that the Bible's narrative is a reflection of an actual true event, and that early versions of Genesis inspired these other similar stories. An atheist might say that the Noah story is just as fictional as the rest of them. I'm not particularly interested in that little debate. The main point is that there are common narrative tropes, motifs in ancient myth, which tell us that at one point or another, these myths shared common points of origin, or common influences. The flood myth is, as I suggested above, probably the best known example of this phenomenon, but it's not the one I'm interested in for this video. No, what we're concerned with here is the way that various stories seem to depict oddly similar scenarios of a sky god, or a storm god, or culture hero linked to these elements, defeating an ocean or ocean monster, often some form of serpent or dragon. This is a wider pattern, visible outside of Mesopotamia too. See Thor's battle against Jormungandr, the role played by Apophis in the Egyptian cosmology, and potentially even Achilles' battle with Scamander in the Iliad. But there's indications that specifically in the Mesopotamian examples of these combat myths, there's a more consistent symbolism at play. That is, in these stories, the victorious symbol of the sky tends to represent order and authority, while the sea dragons represent chaos. If you've ever heard right-wing grifters talking nonsensically about chaos dragons, this is where they've got that idea from. Sometimes the idea of creation is a part of this motif, such as in the Bible's creation story. God, also known as Yahweh, who originated as an Israelite storm god, cleaves the primordial waters apart, and the world is born from this victory over the chaos of the sea. Creation is possibly also present as a theme of the Chaoskampf in the Babylonian epic the Enuma Elish. After the storm god Marduk defeats the sea dragon of chaos, Tiamut, and the world is created. Scholarly opinion is divided. Creation isn't necessarily always part of the story, but broadly speaking, this mythic template is the Chaoskampf. The motif depicting the storm, the sky, often as a creator deity, defeating the primordial chaos of the ocean, most commonly represented by some sort of sea dragon. Other examples of this trope exist in the Bible, such as Leviathan's battle with God, and elsewhere in Mesopotamian legend, such as in the Ugaritic Baal cycle, but the general pattern remains similar. Sky god kills sea dragon, and this act causes order to triumph over chaos. And it's pretty clear to me that Eternals is referencing this Chaoskampf in a very interesting way. Let's take another look at this scene then, because it can and should be viewed as a contemporary example of the Chaoskampf. First, Ikaris. Bear in mind that he's the only Eternal who can fly, and that he's named for a legendary figure whose only notable feat was the time he flew around in the sky for a bit. In this scene, he enters from the skies, and this happens directly after he and the other Eternals literally descend from the heavens. Ikaris then, in a great many ways, functions symbolically in this scene as a sky god, and who is it that he fights? A sea dragon. It's a deviant technically, but deviants come in many shapes. This one, though, looks like a dragon and emerges from a sea. But let's go beyond visuals. Within the framework of this film, Ikaris represents order and the deviant chaos. Ikaris acts in service of Arishem and the Celestials, upholding their great plan for the Earth and the cosmos more widely. The Eternals are creatures created to uphold the will of Arishem, and to safeguard the emergence of future Celestials. In order to do this, they protect the human population from the external threat posed by the Deviants. Even after Ikaris learns the truth about the emergence, he spends most of the film acting according to Arishem's authority, in defense of this celestial order. Ikaris then, for much of the film, and certainly at this point, should be considered an agent of order. The Deviants, meanwhile, represent the opposite. These beings are chaos personified, having shifted away from their original purpose and having morphed, evolved into unpredictable predators, disrupting the authority and the ordered plans of the Celestials. And in the long term, as the film indicates later, if the birthing of future Celestials is stopped, the entire universe will return to a state of primordial darkness, essentially the cosmic equivalent of the primordial chaotic ocean from which Mesopotamian legend held our world emerged. Moreover, their physical forms are in constant flux. What we see in the opening of the Eternals Mesopotamia sequence then is a sky god defeating a sea dragon, and in the process symbolizing the impending victory of order over chaos, as following this encounter, the Eternals successfully transform the deviant-infested planet they arrived on into a world fit for Arishem's plans. It takes a while, but they get it done. This moment then can be taken as a modern riff on the Chaoskampf template, or at least the template as it exists in the modern pop academic consciousness. And that's interesting for a few reasons. First, there's an element of foreshadowing here. Evoking the Chaoskampf with Ikaris representing the divine champion of order prefigures the film's twist, which sees Madden's Eternal recommit himself to Arishem's plan at the expense of his teammates' lives. And second, I've discussed in a previous video the fact that Eternals is interested thematically in mythopoeia, the process by which legends are formed. Having a Chaoskampf type situation play out as these godlike figures arrive in ancient Mesopotamia is one of many instances where the film cheekily hints at elements of historical cultures having been set in motion by the actions of the Eternals. Last, and call me a nerd if you want, but I just think it's kinda awesome that literary features like the tropes and motifs of the Chaoskampf can persist over thousands and thousands of years, and still function in thematically fascinating ways. So there you have it. That's the myth you missed in Eternals, and why it's kinda poggers. I should make a few quick caveats. First, the name Chaoskampf seems to be falling out of favour in scholarly circles in favour of the less loaded term combat myth. and more experts are beginning to believe, for one reason or another, that some of these myths are less linked than they might appear. But none of that makes this reference in Eternals any less valid, because the film is referring to the modern idea of these linkages and their symbolic resonance far more than it refers to the ancient texts themselves. And if you want to find out some more about these topics, check out the links in the description below, some of which I used while researching this video. Otherwise, hey, thanks for watching. Give this video a quick like if you found it interesting, and check out the rest of my videos on Eternals, or the rest of this video series, by clicking the card in the corner now. Big thanks as always to my patrons on screen now, particularly Kevin Douglas and Ian Fifield.